extremely topical and extremely timely AMET webinar. On February 24th, the premises that had been governing much of the Western world were shattered by Vladimir Putin's brutal invasion and barbaric assault of Ukraine. Finally, after much of the world was in deep decades-long slumber, relying on the liberal world order with the United States at its helm, they had a rude awakening that this is no longer a Lockean or Kantian rational world of ethics, but a Hobbesian world where there are actors on the world stage, such as Vladimir Putin, who aim to create a Hobbesian world where life is nasty, brutish, and short in his maniacal quest for Russian hegemony. In the meantime, there is another supreme evil on the world stage, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Somehow, though, what we at AMET believe is an act of supreme diplomatic malpractice. While Russia had been warning the world about their intentions to invade Ukraine, we had let the Russian emissary to the talks in Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov, do our negotiating for us. If you've not seen this already, we are about to show you for a few minutes the YouTube video of Mr. Ulyanov gleefully boasting about the enormous amount of concessions that he and his colleagues from Red China have been able to extort from the United States.
Iranian colleagues are fighting for Iranian nuclear national interests like lions. Indeed, I'm serious. They fight for every comma, every word, and as a rule, quite successfully. I must recognize that.
Do you think that this could be a good deal for Iran, because there have been different arguments inside the
I'm absolutely sincere in this regard. Iran got much more than it could expect, much more. Realistically speaking, Iran got more than, frankly, I expected, others expected. This is a matter of fact. Our Chinese friends were also very efficient and useful as co-negotiators. We could rely on each other on many points. And on many points, through joint efforts, we succeeded. I can recollect dozens of such cases when on rather serious, significant questions, we managed together to get positive results, close to what we wanted to achieve.
Thanks in great part to the courageous work of Gabriel Naranjo, who had previously served on the Iran desk at the State Department and was contacted from his former colleagues at State, the National Security Council, and the European Union. They had been so aghast at the phenomenal degree of concessions that were offered to Iran that they leaked the information to him to get out, so that we can now share this, and we have been throughout Capitol Hill. By the way, Gabe Naranjo will be speaking for AMET on Wednesday, April 6th at 12 noon. Including among these enormous concessions is the lifting of sanctions from some of the world's absolute worst arch-terrorists and human rights abusers, including the lifting of sanctions for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Among those to have sanctions removed are people such as Hussein Dagan, who led the IRG forces in Beirut, Lebanon in 1983 in its massacre of 241 US Marines as they were asleep in their barracks. Also, the sanctions will be lifted for Mohsen Razai and Ali Akbar Velayati, who were responsible for the 1994 AMIA bombing, a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires, Argentina, which killed 85 civilians and maimed hundreds and hundreds more. And of course, sanctions will be lifted against Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, the infamous butcher of Tehran, who conducted thousands of show trials that lasted no more than a few moments, and who was responsible for the execution of thousands and thousands of courageous dissidents and members of the LGBTQ community. So although the United States has been trying to impose an entire oil embargo against Russia, they're allowing Russia and Iran to trade in oil and to allow Rosatom, Russia's state-controlled nuclear company, to have free trade between it and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Why are we overlooking all of this in our hasty impulse to just make a deal? Thanks to Mr. Putin, the world can finally understand that evil exists. But why do they not connect the dots in the Department of State to the horrendous evil that exists within the Iranian regime? How do the Israelis feel about this? Although the Islamic Republic despises us here in the United States as a great Satan, we all know that Israel is in the neighborhood and is the low-hanging fruit and are on the front lines of attack. We're supremely honored to have with us here today Brigadier General Amir Avivi, who is actually serving double time and reserve duty right now. Mr. Avivi had been the head of the auditing and consulting department of the IDF, including the IDF, the Ministry of Defense, and the Israeli Ministry in Industries. He also served as Brigadier Commander, Deputy Division Commander, and head of the Military School of Engineers. He's also served as the aide-de-camp for the Chief of the General Staff of the IDF, Lieutenant General Moshe Boogie Ya'alon. Amir was at the heart of the policy-making process in the Israeli government and defense establishment during that term. Amir also serves as the principal of the New State Solution Working Group, and is the founder and CEO of Habitonistim, or the IDSF. Amir, how is the news of Ukraine and the way the world has reacted to this informing Israel right now?
Okay, so maybe a few words about Russia and Ukraine. I think it's one of the things that worries me. Obviously, what's going on in Ukraine is devastating for the Ukrainians, and it's terrible to see this huge destruction. But me as a general, when I look at it, I want to really understand what are the interests, why is this happening? Could we have prevented the war? And in order to do that, we need also to look on the Russian side. And I think that people tend to simplify, say, okay, Putin is crazy, he's evil. I don't think this is the case. I think that he's serving Russian interests, and we need to understand them, because if we understand them, or if the West would have understood enough Russian interests, we would probably not be in war now. So this is why it's important to understand. Now, I want to explain how nations behave. Usually they are motivated by three main things. One is the national pride. When nations' pride is hurt, they tend to react to that. And we saw it, for example, the way the First World War ended with Germany, and the humiliation they felt at the end of this war, and the way they reacted in the Second World War to this humiliation they perceived as a humiliation. When Russia or USSR fell apart and broke into pieces, Putin, at the time he was a KGB officer, he saw this happening, and for him it was devastating. He felt that this is really affecting the national pride of the Russian people. And he has this basic notion that Russia needs to go back to be a key player in the world. This is one thing that motivates, I don't think it's only Putin, I think it's overall the Russian people. The second thing that affects countries is fear. And we would ask, okay, what exactly do the Russians have to fear? And the fact that NATO has been, since this fall of Russia, pushing NATO to the east, more and more countries joining. Now, NATO is a military alliance. It's not European Union, it's NATO. So when a country like Russia sees one country and another and this is getting closer to Russian borders, going into NATO, they perceive it as a threat. Now, I spoke on TV, I said, you know, the Russians remember the invasion of the Germans, they remember the invasion of the French, they remember the invasion of the Swedish into Russia. So one of the people looked at me and said, Amir, are you serious? This happens in 1945. Said, listen, we Jews remember going out of Egypt like it was yesterday. We talk about it for a whole week in Pesach, right? We actually talk about it every day. We don't forget what happened to us in Purim in Persia. We don't forget the Maccabees and the Greeks. We live this all the time. The same goes for them. They remember, they don't forget. And the decision at the time by the Obama administration to start pushing Ukraine into NATO, this was something that was a red line, that Russians couldn't agree to it anymore, in their eyes, okay? And this is part of why all this is happening at the moment. The third thing is the aspiration for more influence and resources, whether political or economical or whatever. In the case of the Russians, they see huge strategic importance in the Black Sea. This is why for them Crimea, this is why for them all this shore of the Black Sea is important, and this is why they're operating in this area. Now, talking about real politics, they were expecting, once they amassed this huge army on the borders, for the West to say, okay, we understand, let's negotiate. Let's see how Ukraine goes back into the Russian sphere and not the West. And what happened is really strange, because on one hand, Zelensky is behaving as if he is part of the West. On the other hand, the West is not willing to fight for him. So what were the options really? I mean, if they're not willing to fight with you and you are stuck between two huge countries like Russia and the States, you have to really think about it and try to avoid war. But this is how tragically we are inside this war. And I think that years and years and years from now, they will discuss all the decisions made by the Ukrainians, by the Russians, by the West. A lot of mistakes. And I can say for sure that with different kind of thinking, more connected to the ground, more real politics, maybe we could have prevented this war. By the way, Zelensky, the way he's behaving reminds me of old Jewish discussion. You know, when we were occupied by the Romans 2,000 years ago, we had two big rabbis that approached the problem in a different way. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, look, we cannot overcome the Romans. Let's talk to them. Let's use diplomacy. Let's move the center of the studies from Jerusalem to Yavne. And this is how we reacted to that. And there was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, no, we cannot live with this occupation. We need to fight this huge empire. And we did. We rebelled for the second time. It ended with 500,000 Jews dead and 2,000 years of exile. But on the other hand, when we established the state of Israel, who do we remember? We remember the bravery of Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba, not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So when I look at Zelensky, I say to myself, okay, this guy wants to be Rabbi Akiva. What will be the price? Who knows? I mean, for us, it was 2,000 years of exile and millions of people who died. I don't know what will happen with Ukraine and whether the price is worthwhile or not. I don't know if the Ukrainians are blessed as the Jews are. And so we'll see. How is this affecting Israel? In a strange way, before talking about Iran, in a strange way, I want to open your eyes to some things that are actually positive on the Israeli side. The first thing is Aliyah. We're getting Jews. Jews coming to Israel is always good news. And I think that the potential we have of Jews migrating to Israel from Russia and from Ukraine, because Russia is in a bad shape and Ukraine is in a very bad shape. So we have hundreds of thousands of Jews, and Israel needs to prepare to absorb them. It's a major issue. It will change and affect and shape the Israeli society. So this is something that is really changing Israel, and it's a big deal for us. And we'll have to see how it evolves. The other thing is that we always had a bit of tensions with the North European countries like Finland, Sweden. These are countries that historically support the Palestinians. Till not long ago, we had the crisis with the Polish. But now what is happening, it's because suddenly NATO woke up to a reality where they understand that there is a huge army in front of them, and on the other side, they don't have anything. Just to understand, Germany, this big country, with 50 tanks. Russia with 12,000. It's unbelievable. So everybody is reaching out now to Israel, and all of our industries are now in Europe and in North Europe, signing huge deals, huge. So all our relationship with the Eastern Europe and with the North Europe is changing in favor for us. The other effect it's having is, as you probably all heard, Europe, the West Europe is very heavily dependent on Russian gas. 40% of the gas that is imported into Europe comes from Russia. In some countries, it's 80%. And due to the sanctions and what is going on now, Europe is trying to cut Russian oil and Russian gas. And in Israel, in the last decade, we found huge amounts of gas. And now they're coming to us and asking us to sell gas to Europe. So this also is changing the position of Israel, and it gives us a lot of strength. So there are several things that are changing in our favor. But one of the big problems is that while the world is focusing on Ukraine, the US is moving forward with the Iranian deal. And the Iranian deal is devastating for Israel. It's really bad. And I want to explain why. The first thing that will happen if this deal is signed will be the relief of sanctions. Now, the Iranians, have, even with quite heavy sanctions, have managed to build a huge force around Israel. And they want to, in 1 or 2 years, reach a point where they have between 250 to 300,000 rockets and missiles and UAVs. And once they feel this force is strong enough, they are willing to go to war. At the end of the day, they're saying it every day. They want to destroy Israel. So if sanctions will be relieved, and immediately they will get something like $100 billion, this money will be used to exponentially build this strong power that they're building around us in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. By the way, in the last operation, they even shot Israel from Yemen and from Iraq. Wasn't a very successful shooting, but they did. So, you know, we are getting aid from the US, $3 billion, 4 if I count also the last budget for Iron Dome. But they are going to get $100 billion immediately. So this will surely lead us to war. So basically, the US policy is leading Israel into war. This is what's happening, and it's important to understand. The other thing is that if this agreement is signed, this is the message for all the Sunni states that they need nuclear capabilities as well. So the Saudis are already preparing agreements with Pakistan to procure. They don't even need to develop weapons. They will procure them from Pakistan. The Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Gulf states, they're all going to build up nuclear capabilities. And because these countries are not very stable, it's just a matter of time until terrorists will get hold of bombs. So this will not only destabilize completely the Middle East, this will destabilize the whole world. Now, in this agreement, there is no inspection at all in the sites. And also, the agreement has an ending. In 45 years, the Iranians will be able to enrich as much uranium as they want and build an arsenal of 100 bombs. Now, they are building missiles which can reach the US. They are going to terrorize the whole world. And this is something that Israel cannot agree to. So basically, we feel we are on our own, and we need to prepare a viable capability to attack Iran and its installations. But attacking Iran means a full-scale war, also with Hezbollah and Gaza and Iraq and Yemen. So basically, the US administration is pushing Israel towards a full-scale war. And we will need to really build a huge force and invest huge amounts of money and prepare the society and everything, where the default is understanding who the Iranians are and attacking them. And I mean, Iran attacking the nuclear sites in Iran, it's not Iraq, it's not Afghanistan, it's simply deploying the Air Force, one attack, and that's it. I don't know why there's so much talking when the issue can be solved quite easily. But this administration, like Obama's administration, is pushing a policy that will endanger Israel existentially. And we must all the time talk about it, but also prepare for this reality.
Right, right. And it will come back to bite the United States in the backside, because they don't only say death to Israel after their sermons in the mosques on Friday, they say death to the United States. The United States is the evil Satan. You're just the minor Satan. And they have, as you well know, many bases, especially in the tri-border area of Latin America and Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil. So this is really a very, very, it's an important existential for Israel, but it is also an existential issue for the United States, because they want Islamic hegemony, and that's the framework that we use in the United States. So with that, I am going to open up the platform for questions, and I want to introduce you to our wonderful new rising star in Amet, Gabe Toole, who is a legislative fellow for Amet. Gabe, would you like to read some of the questions that have come in?
Absolutely. Thank you, General, so much for that speech, and thank you everyone for posting the comments. Please continue to do so if you have any specific questions you'd like to post. I'm doing my best job to kind of consolidate them. I might not be able to get to all of them, but I'll get to as many as I can. I think first, General, I'd like to ask, so you mentioned in terms of Russia and Ukraine that many mistakes were made along the way, particularly by the West as well. What mistakes have been made so far in terms of Iran and the Iranian nuclear program? And you talked a little bit about this, but if you could talk a little more specifically about the mistakes that we've been making on our end so far.
So first of all, the Iranians have learned the lessons of Libya and also Ukraine. The Libyans had nuclear capabilities. Gaddafi came to the Western world. He said, listen, I'm willing to give up these nuclear capabilities. in order to have good relationship with Europe. So Europe and the US said, great, he got rid of his nuclear capabilities. Following that, he had a appraisal against him, and what Europe did, they took the whole NATO Air Force and attacked him. So the lesson to the Arab world was, if you give up your capabilities, you will be attacked. The same happened with Ukraine. In 1994, the US, Britain, Russia said to the Ukrainians, listen, give up your nuclear capabilities, and we'll give you assurances that you will never be attacked. Where are these assurances now, when this country is being completely destroyed? Where is Britain? Where is the US? They gave this they gave the Ukrainians assurances. This is exactly what they're saying to Israel. Give up the Jordan Valley, give up Judea and Samaria. We'll give you assurances. And we see what these assurances are worth, right? So the Iranians understand that if they want the regime to exist for the long term, they need nuclear capabilities. If they want to be a hegemony, if they want to control the Middle East and from there intimidate Europe and the US, they need nuclear capabilities. They're not going to give up these capabilities. They're not going to give up. And the lesson is that the only way to stop them is create an existential threat on the regime itself. It can be done either with very, very severe sanctions and very tight control of what's going on inside Iran, and you need a military viable capability ready, and they need to know that it's ready and you have willingness to use it. Then maybe they will try and not move forward. But at this stage, really, the only really viable option is military. And we need to get ready for that. Israel at the moment is alone. I'm hoping, I don't know, maybe if we can stall this for 2 years and hope that there will be a change of administration. We need to prepare today all our supporters who understand what the Iranians are, what is the threat, and tell them, okay, this is money time. If you win the next elections, the first thing you need to do is attack Iran. And I'm saying this, this will also benefit the US, not only the Middle East, because the reason why Russia is so aggressive, the reason why the Chinese are feeling empowered is when they look at the US and they see that the US cannot stand even against a country so weak like Iran. They say, okay, if they're afraid of the Iranians, obviously they won't do anything to us. And this is why we're seeing Russia in Ukraine. This is why we probably will see later on China expanding its influence in the Southern Sea. They are not afraid, and you need to build deterrence. Now, it's easier to build a deterrence through Iran than try to build a deterrence by challenging the Russians. So you need to choose your enemies. If Iran becomes nuclear, and Iran will join with Russia and China as a group that will challenge the Western world, the whole world is going to change. Everything, not only the Middle East. This is why there is a need really to get ready for a military option.
So to kind of segue into that military option, we've had a decent amount of questions related to the military option. So if the deal falls through, you know, and we do have to look at some sort of military option, we've had some questions. Is Israel truly alone? There is a shifting of relations between the Gulf states and Israel moving away from Iran. Is there any possibility that Israel would find some military allies in the Gulf, maybe Saudi Arabia, that would be willing to potentially preemptively join Israel on some sort of offensive to take out these facilities?
Well, you know that during Trump's administration, Israel joined CENTCOM. And through CENTCOM, it's much easier to coordinate all the different forces. But you cannot really coordinate all these forces without the US. So at the moment, 2 weeks ago, we had our chief of staff visiting Bahrain and meeting also with the Qatarian chief of staff. We have our prime minister now in Egypt meeting also with the Saudis. The Sunni world understands that they need to ally with Israel against Iran. They don't trust this administration anymore. We are offering different solutions to help them, but it's to conduct an attack on Iran. I cannot see something like that happening. I cannot see a coalition led by Israel with the Sunnis without Americans. You need the US to lead this and not to side with Iran. I mean, I can tell you, talking about the way I explained why the Russians are invading Ukraine, I think that every single major thing that happened in the world, I could see it, think about it, and understand the interests. Can agree, not agree, but at least understand the interests. I cannot understand this administration. It doesn't make sense what they're doing. They're endangering the US. They're endangering all of their allies. They're losing credibility. They have nothing to gain from this. And yet they're pushing forward this agreement. There is something I feel that there is something that we don't understand and we don't know what it is. It's unbelievable what is going on.
Speaking of things that are hard to understand, we've had some questions related to trying to understand basically the Iranian mindset. And so one of the questions was, you mentioned that Iran wants to destroy the state of Israel. They say this publicly, their actions prove this as well. The question basically is, wouldn't an attack such as that risk the survivability of the Iranian regime itself? Meaning, if Iran were to attack Israel, like, why would they want to do that if that is actually risking their own existence? What is driving their motivation, and how is that in their best interest?
First of all, they got something that is a miracle for them. They got an agreement with the consent of all the world that says that there can be nuclear. What do they need more than that? The only thing that this agreement asks for them is to wait a few years. The idea, you cannot say on one hand, I don't want a nuclear Iran, and on the other hand, sign an agreement that says that there will be nuclear after a few years, with endless amount of capability to enrich uranium, which means that they can have 100 bombs, not one. And it doesn't make sense. So the Iranians, because they know there might be attack, they are handling themselves very carefully, but they are looking at North Korea. They see that even if you are a very poor and weak country, and this is not the case of Iran, Iran is not Northern Korea, okay? That once you do an experiment with a bomb, that's it, nobody will touch you. Look at the ability of this country, North Korea, to stand in front of the US. Nobody is touching them because they have a nuclear weapon. So they need the nuclear weapon as assurance, as an umbrella to spread their ideology, to spread their militias, and they have global aspirations. The Iranians are operating in all the Middle East, we know. They're operating in Africa. They're threatening the Moroccans. This is why Morocco signed the MOU with Israel. This is why they want Israeli training and Israeli weapons, because Iran is attacking Morocco. Weaponizing Polisario, the organization that is fighting Morocco, helping the Algerians. Iran is building UAVs that can attack the US in Venezuela. This is the new Cuba, in the backyard of the US. all Iranian know-how. This is happening as we speak. And yet, this administration is empowering them.
So we've had some questions, basically on a little bit more. Two questions that I'll kind of combine into one. One, is there any hope that this deal is going to fall through, or does it really look like this deal is going to happen? And then for the normal people, because most of the people on this webinar, you know, probably aren't in high roles of power, what can the normal people do to try and speak out against this? Is there anything that we can do kind of as a layman to support Israel to speak out against this?
Well, it seems that at the moment, the administration is doing everything in their hand, completely surrendering to the Iranians and trying to push forward this agreement. At the moment, the Russians are stalling it a bit. And they have some demands. I'm not sure this will hold. In the Russian case, if they cannot sell oil and sanctions are relieved from the Iranians, and the world will get oil from Iran and not from Russia, that might be a bit problematic for them. So maybe we'll see them still trying to stall the signing of the agreement, but I don't know. It's not clear. At the moment, it seems as if we are going to an agreement.
And in terms of domestically in Israel, if you could speak a little bit and give us some insight in terms of public opinion versus, you know, regarding this deal, and then also is Bennett doing enough to speak out? Is he showing a strong enough hand, in your opinion?
He tweeted once. Well, I think that the decision of the Prime Minister to try to mediate between Russia and Ukraine, something that Israel has no advantage in doing, because we are deeply involved with coordinating with the Russians in the northern border. We cannot really coordinate, mediate. What I'm worried about that is, first of all, it's really not our mission. And secondly, if you say that you have time for that, it means that maybe for you, the Iranian issue is not that important. I mean, if I was the Prime Minister of Israel, I would have taken all the 120 MKs, fly to Vienna and sit there with tents and not move until I stop this agreement. I don't see the government doing enough in Israel to stop. It seems like they are like surrendering to this reality. And it's not enough saying that we are not part of the agreement. Sure, well, of course we are not part of the agreement. But once the agreement is signed, it changes reality completely. It's not enough to say that we are not part of it. And then talking about what people can do, I mean, today everything is in social media. I think that people should write to write to congressmen and senators and be active and say what they think and say how this is endangering Israel and how it's endangering the US as well. So we all need to deal with this.
It would be very helpful, by the way, Gabe and Hussein and I have been really trying to get this message out to Capitol Hill. If everybody called their member of Congress at 202-225-3121, ask to speak to your member of Congress and tell them how this is a horrible capitulation to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that it will pose a huge national security threat to the United States and her allies, Israel and the Gulf states. That's 202-225-3121. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Gabe, I'm sorry.
All right, yeah, so I'll continue with some questions here. So when you were speaking about Ukraine and Russia, General, you mentioned that Europe has now kind of woken up again to the threat of Russia, and NATO is now being re-strengthened and people are reorienting. What is it going to take for us to wake up to the threat of Iran? Obviously, Israel's awake to that threat. The Gulf states are starting to wake up some, but what is it going to take for a similar kind of shift in mindset?
So I think that one of the things that we are now going to submit a very elaborate position paper to the Prime Minister, exactly answering this question. And I think that I can tell you that from 30 years of military service, with all the wars and operations that participated, I've never ever been so worried about what is coming, about the future. And I can tell you that if I look and give a short brief about how the national security of Israel evolved, I can say that until 48, we had what we called then a fight between neighbors. Zionism was growing, building towns and so on. The Arabs were revolting against that, much similar to what we are seeing today in the mixed cities, in the Negev, the Galil, and so on. And this is how it started. Then in 48, we saw a long area of big wars. The Independence War, 56, 67, 73, 82, and so on. And then it changed. It changed to small operations. We saw the Intifada, we saw all these operations in Gaza, Lebanon, and so on. And what is happening now is the convergence of all three. We see again this fight between Arabs and Jews, but this time the Arabs are having the upper hand. Zionism is completely stopped. The Arabs are grabbing the land, terrorizing us, challenging us, and we're not really reacting properly. We just saw the terrible terror attack in Beersheba with the Bedouin that was inspired by ISIS and killed four Israelis. People are not feeling safe. And then we also have still these operations ongoing, but also now there is a potential for a huge war with Iran and Iranian proxies, combined with an uprising inside Israel. This is what we need to prepare for. And to prepare for that, you need a whole different set of investments in the military, and you need to move fast. Israel needs to invest a lot of money, and it needs to move really fast to strengthen the IDF, to strengthen the police and the border patrol, to build a national guard that can defend Jews in their towns. And this is the reality where we need to prepare for. And the more prepared we'll be, then we might manage to not to find ourselves in that situation, and if we do, at least we'll be ready. But at the pace we're moving now, war will be upon us and we won't be ready enough. And this will have a price.
To speak a little bit more to that, so say that the US does come to Israel's aid and supports a military strike on Iran, and Israel decides to carry that out with US support, and Israel strikes these nuclear facilities preemptively. Could you speak a little bit about the threat of Iran and Iran's potential response to such an event that could trigger a war, and just so people can kind of understand the very large regional threat of Iran and what that would look like the day after?
Okay, so the real challenge is not how Iran will respond from Iran, because Iran has a certain amount of missiles, not too many, which are very long range. And our defense systems can deal with that. I would guess that a preemptive attack will not only attack nuclear installations, it will attack also these missiles. But even if they shoot, I can tell you that today, the Arrow 3, we can deal with these missiles in space. Today, a missile like that, it goes all the way to space and then it comes back into the atmosphere. Arrow 3 destroys missiles in space. It's like a small space shuttle that destroys the missiles in space. and we are very advanced and we have the capabilities to deal with that. The real problem will be Lebanon, will be Hezbollah, because if the Iranians command Hezbollah to shoot, and they do, this will mean a war with Hezbollah, and this will mean that we will need to operate in Lebanon. We cannot have a war with Lebanon like we do with Gaza, sitting just with Iron Dome and trying to deal, because it's too many rockets. You need to operate fast, and Israel knows that. This is why all of our plans are built in a way that if we have a war in Lebanon, we go inside, we maneuver. And to do that, you need to really train and equip the ground forces accordingly. Israel has invested huge amounts of money in the Air Force and air defense and intelligence and so on. And this was at the expense of the ground forces. And because the ground forces will be needed, Israel has no choice but investing more money and also equipping better the ground forces for this scenario.
So I know you have already kind of spoken about the fact that Iran wants a nuke. They're going to try and get a nuke regardless of whether or not this deal comes through. Is there anything that could disincentivize them from pursuing a nuclear program? If you could speak a little about that, or is there nothing?
I don't think they're going to give this up. They will do anything in their hand to get their hands on nuclear weapons. Again, the only thing that might stop them is the price. I mean, if they say, okay, we cross a red line and then they will topple us, they will attack us, or whatever, this is deterrence. You know, they might maybe not get into it. But remember that at the moment, Iran has full backup of China, and China is relying very much on Iranian oil and goods and so on, and they have very strong relationships. The Chinese are in Iran, and they're really very strong relationship. Then you have Russia backing Iran. The reason why Russia is so much backing Iran is that 20% of Russia is Sunnis, it's Muslim Sunnis. 40% of the Russian army is Muslim Sunnis. Now, Russia is afraid of Sunni radicals. They're afraid of ISIS, of Al-Qaeda, of the Muslim Brotherhood. All of these are enemies of Iran. So the Russians are utilizing Iran to attack the Sunni radicals to prevent the spreading of this ideology towards Russia. This is why they are cooperating, these two countries. So Iran is also backed by Russia. And then it's also backed by the US. How great are these Iranians? Amazing. Everybody likes them. Go figure out why.
So to talk a little bit, a couple of questions about Russia. So the big one related to the war in Ukraine and Russia, how has that changed Russia-Israel relations at all? And if you could speak a little bit about the importance of Israel-Russian relations, maybe particularly in Syria, and if that's still relevant, and if that's changed at all because of this war.
I want to mention something historical about Russia. You know, when Israel was established, when they voted in the UN in 1947, and the one country that was supporting us was Russia. And because of Russian support, the US administration that at the time was really unwilling to support a Jewish state and found itself supporting it. You know, when they asked Ben-Gurion, there's a very interesting YouTube when they interviewed Ben-Gurion in the 60s after he finished his 2 sessions as prime minister, first prime minister of Israel. Chaim Yavin asked him in the YouTube, tell me, Mr. Ben-Gurion, who do we have to thank for having a Jewish state? And he said, clear cut, the Russians. So this is historically speaking. Talking about today, Russia is in northern border. They are basically controlling Syria. Any flight, any attack Israel conducts in Syria, and it's crucial for us. It's crucial for us to attack the project of missiles that is moving from Iran into Syria, into Lebanon, needs to be coordinated with the Russians. The Russians can also affect dramatically our capability to attack Iran. If they place advanced anti-air missiles in Iran and let the Iranians operate them, this might affect dramatically Israeli capability to do what we need to do. So this is very, very sensitive with us. We need to really, really be careful the way we conduct ourselves with the Russians, because we have deep interests that are existential in a way. So Israel is doing exactly that. We are sympathizing with the Ukrainians, we're sending hospitals, we are helping as much as we can, but we're also careful in what we're saying to the Russians, because Putin is unexpected. If you say something not in place, this might actually be devastating for Israel. And we need to be really, well, we cannot afford to just think, you know, high values and so on, and ignore the most basic national security issues for Israel. And also, I want to tell you something. I'm really sorry about the Ukrainians, but we have to remember more than 1 million Jews were massacred in Ukraine. The amount of pogroms that we suffered from the Ukrainians is inconceivable. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed by Ukrainians. So sympathy is great, but first of all, Israel's security, it comes first.
Thank you, General. So I'm going to transition again to another question, back to Iran. And this one basically is just asking, is there anything that can be done to support the Iranian people as all this goes on? And do you think that regime change is doable? And is that the best option?
Well, Iran is an interesting country. More than 50% of the people who live in Iran are not Persian. You have Kurds, you have Arabs, you have 25% of Iran is Azeris. And even among the Persians, there is a group that is not supporting at all this regime, and there is a group that is supporting. So there is all the time turmoil inside Iran. The society is not happy. The economy is terrible. Many people don't like this regime. And they are seeking the support of the world. And when the US and Europe are supporting the regime instead of the people, it's amazing. I mean, on one hand, they're so sympathetic with the Ukrainians, and on the other hand, they behave terribly to the Iranian people. Why are they supporting this regime against this nation? So, you know, it's people use values when it suits them. When it doesn't, they don't have a problem to ally themselves with the most evil people in the world. And this is the sad reality, the ugly truth.
Thank you, General. Another question we have, which I don't know how much you can answer to this in open source, but it's related to Iran's intercontinental ballistic missile program, and basically asking, how capable is their program right now? How long would it take for them to actually mount a nuclear warhead onto one of those missiles? You know, say they've done some nuclear testing, they have a bomb. Can they just throw that under a missile and be done with it? Or, you know, how much time do they need?
I'll tell you something. What worries me is not what we know, what we don't know. I can tell you that the most meaningful things that happen in this program Like, for example, the building of the whole site of Natanz and the foundings that we found when the archive was taken. We were always 1 year or 2 years late in understanding what is happening. So on the one hand, there are people who estimate that they will be able to produce a first bomb in a few months. But this is again relying on what we know, not on what we don't know. And we need to understand that we don't have a full picture of what is really going on there. And this is what worries me. I mean, we can find ourselves any moment with them suddenly conducting a nuclear test, and that's it. It's a whole new world out there. This is why I feel that we don't have enough time. We really need to do something about it, and there will be repercussions once we do. And they will retaliate, and we have to deal with it.
Thank you, General. We've got a few minutes left. I think that's a good place to end it for now. I'm going to throw it back to Sarah. Sarah, if you want to take it from here.
Right. General Amir Avivi, we cannot thank you enough for your characteristic brilliance and moral courage and intellectual honesty to say it as it truly is, and for all of your years of devotion and service to the one Jewish state in the world, the state of Israel. I do want to say that next week we are honored to have Cameron Kansarina, who is the policy director of the National Union for Democratic Iran, made out of diaspora Iranian dissidents. And as he has told me and others, 2/3 of the Iranians were born after the Khomeini revolution and despise the regime. And it would take so little if we in the United States had the right priorities to work with them, with the CIA on the ground, and overthrow this evil, evil regime. So he will be with us on Wednesday, March 30th at 12 noon. And then on April 6th at 12 noon, we will have Gabriel Naranha, who is the wonderful former member of the Iran desk at the State Department, who is a great American who has leaked the horrendous details of this agreement for the world to see through his Twitter account. And he also wrote a very wonderful article about it on Tablet magazine. So, and Gabriel Naranha will be speaking for us on April 6th. I hope to God that this horrendous deal will not be signed by then. And we have got really, everyone should call their member of Congress, warn them about this deal. It is against the national security interest of not only Israel, but the United States and all of the US allies in the Gulf. And this will come back to bite us in the backside. So thank you, thank you. Oh, and as my wonderful director of communications, Naomi Grant, has said, please, do what you can to support the very good work of Emet. We are working tirelessly around the clock, trying to warn Congress against this deal. And there are not only Republicans, but are Democrats now that are willing to speak out against this deal. And I would want everyone to look at the excellent, excellent speech that the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a Democrat, Robert Menendez, had given a month ago about this horrendous deal. And he is a Democrat. So, all of us have got to speak up. This is against the national security interests of Israel, the Gulf states, and America and the West. Thank you very, very, very much. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.